What up, world? It's Percussive Reverb back in the studio with the Moog Labyrinth. Now, Moog is usually known for their more East Coast style of synthesis, but with this Labyrinth, they're taking a step further west with what they're calling a parallel generative analog synthesizer. So what is this term generative or generative music? Well, actually, it's a term that was coined and popularized by Brian Eno. So rather than just having a keyboard where you just play a set of predetermined notes, with a generative system, you put in the notes that you want it to play, and you add in a little bit of randomness, and then all of a sudden the machine is sort of playing those notes maybe differently than how you wanted it to play, but it helps you come up with new ideas, and it keeps changing, and that's the entire point. So Moog has put everything in this Labyrinth that you need to do generative synthesis. First off, you have 32 patch points. I believe this is the most patch points that I've ever seen on one of the Moog semi-modular units. And you have a parallel voice system and 2 sequencers. And we're gonna get into all of that. Let's just jump right to it. So these dual sequencers on the Labyrinth, these are the heart of this semi-modular generative synth. And I say that because you have 2 of them. You have 2 8-step, or as they call it, 8-bit sequencers here. And there's a very interesting choice of terminology that Moog has used, calling these sequencer steps bits and adding these corrupt knobs, which are basically just randomizers, and these concepts that they call bit flip, which is basically just turning on a step on and off. So let's start from scratch. So first and foremost, when you get the box, be sure to hold on to this Labyrinth cheat codes right here, because there's a lot of button combos that it would help you to remember. Let's start by starting from scratch and just resetting this whole thing. So we'll hold reset and buffer, and now we're at a blank slate for both 8-step sequencers. Of course, we could chain these sequencers together to turn these 8 steps into a 16-step sequence, but I like having 2 because you could do a lot with 8 steps. So if you want to actually turn notes on, whatever step you're on, that's what's flashing. So let's turn this step on. We hit bit flip to do that. And then we just advance to other steps or bits. And if we wanted to do the sequencer 2 down here, the advance moves the steps or bits in both sequencers, but if you want to add notes down here, you would hit bit flip for this row down here. Now what's cool is as you advance, if you have notes on there or bits flipped, I gotta get used to that, you will hear them as you advance through. But let's reset it and let's start it up. So now we're only hearing sequencer 1 because I got that trigger mix knob turned all the way down to sequencer 1. Let's go to the middle. So we're getting a blend of both sequencers at the same time. So now what's cool is, like I was saying earlier, there's a lot more that meets the eye with this sequencer. Generative synthesis, you have a system where you set the rules. So we just set some of the rules by setting the actual frequency of notes to be played, but now we can go a little bit further and actually set this sequencer to be quantized to whatever scale of our choosing. We will pull out this Labyrinth cheat codes again, and on the back we'll find all of the scales that's possible to be generated with these sequencers. And that's really cool within itself because you could always unquantize those sequences and have something a little bit less musical, but if you wanted to quantize that to a scale, you could do so. Let's do a pentatonic. And now we could actually increase the CV range for each separate sequencer, and we could control the sequencer amount per VCO. So we could do it for the main VCO and for the modulation VCO. And we can control the sequencer amount on the wavefolder and the filter cutoff as well. So there's a lot of ways to take advantage of the sequencer and have it affect not just notes, but also affect different timbres, adding in harmonics and whatnot. So the lower we go, the more we're going to stay within like 1 octave. But then the higher we go. So if we go up here to the VCO, we can see that we can turn the sequencer amount all the way over to quantize, and it will make sure that the notes that are being played are quantized to whatever scale. The less you go from here, the more it's going to deviate from that scale. So now let's add a little bit of randomization, because this is where things get fun. And Moog has added that by way of these 2 corrupt knobs here. So the moment that I start increasing this corrupt knob, I'm now going to start, as they say, flipping bits that weren't flipped previously, or just adding notes to steps that didn't have notes in the first place. And it will also subtract notes from steps that you put notes down on. So it just corrupts the whole sequence. Now what's cool is, if you get to something that you like, you could hold the buffer button. Now that saves it. And it saves it in a state to where if I go and turn the corrupt knob again, it'll do its thing. That's really handy for, especially for performing and whatnot, and doing these generative things, but then you want to add a little bit of control and not just have notes just randomly flying in and out all over the place. You could have a home base to go back to. We could change the length of each sequence to whatever length that we want. We could have sequence 1 going at 4, and then we could keep sequence 2 going at 8. So you can get like some polyrhythmic stuff going very easily. And then lastly, you could shift the bits. So if you hit this bit shift, this just sort of shifts the notes on different parts, either going to the left or to the right. It's just another way to sort of just randomly generate some fun. The Labyrinth features 2 audio generating paths. You have a more typical subtractive synthesis path that Moog is known for, but then you also have a voltage control wavefolder in here, which is something that's kind of new for Moog. They put a wavefolder in the Mavis, but it wasn't able to be controlled by voltage like you can with this Labyrinth. Then we also have our subtractive synthesis path, like I mentioned, but this one's a little bit different because they did not put the typical ladder filter that you may find in most of the Moogs that you know about. Instead, there's a 2-pole variable state filter in here. And what's cool is you could actually blend together the signal from the wavefolder with the subtractive synthesis using this blend knob over here. And you could change the order of how it goes. So you can go VCO into the wavefolder and then send that into the filter. You can make it parallel to where they both have their own parallel audio paths, or you can send the filter into the wavefolder itself. All of that is voltage controllable via this patch bay, and of course using this blend knob over here to blend it all together. With this wavefolder, you can instantly generate some complex waveforms, starting with a simple sine wave. Cool. And we can also flip the wavefolder bias with this knob right here. Let's go over to the filter side. It's still in parallel. And we're just at our basic sine wave. And this filter doesn't really have that much to grab onto. because what Moog really wants you to do is start to fold that wave and maybe blend that together and possibly just run that all into the wavefolder so you can get something a little bit more rich. But you can also flip the filter mode here, going from low pass to band pass. But you notice, again, this is not like the ladder filter that we're used to with Moog. Even when I increase this resonance, it's not like beefing up the low end. Got a parallel audio signal path going. And I'm using the Modulation VCO to increase the wavefolder. Let's go sequencer 2 trigger out and go into the bit flip of sequencer 1. So now sequencer 2's triggers are generating different notes in sequencer 1. And then I also have my Arturia key step plugged up from the CV pitch out into the 1 volt per octave input. And that way I could do some transposing on this sort of randomly generated sequence. But let's back up a little bit on this panel because we got a whole maze of small knobs over here and buttons over here, and I guess that's why they called it the Labyrinth, right? So it's a little bit easy to get lost in all this when you're first looking at it. But if we go back over here to our VCO, so then we got this little mixer section over here where we can increase the level of our main VCO and also increase the level of our modulation VCO. And we can add a bit of ring mod, which of course we'll get to in a little bit. And they got noise on here. We can control the noise level and the tone. That is a general breakdown of the VCOs and how they run in conjunction with the folder and with our mixer section right here, and of course with the filter. But let's talk about the envelopes for a second. There's 2 envelopes on here, and they're really basic decay only envelopes, but they modulate different things. So we have envelope generator 1, which is set to control the VCO, the mod VCO, and also the fold amount and the filter cutoff amount. And then we have envelope generator 2 that is hardwired to our VCA and controls basically the audio coming out of both of the fold and the filter signal paths. So with that being said, let's actually start up a sequence and just hear some of these envelopes in action. So Moog already recognized that with this Labyrinth being the generative synthesizer of their semi-modular line, you might want that typical West Coast style that you're used to hearing that's usually created by low-pass gates and very snappy envelopes. And I think that's why they've put these limited envelope generators in here, so you could easily get that snappy sound, but if you want something a little bit more open, of course you could do that, and then you could get a lot more creative with these envelopes, and maybe even add in other envelopes using this patch bay over here. So another cool thing that's on the Labyrinth is this envelope generator trig mix knob right here. This is cool because we could just, with this knob, go from triggers from sequencer 1 over to triggers just from sequencer 2, or I can keep it in the middle and have them both coming in. And this becomes really handy when you start diving into these dual sequencers. The notes or the bits of these sequencers can affect a lot of different things. It doesn't just affect the actual pitch and gate and triggers of the VCO, but it can also affect the envelope amounts of your wavefolder, and you can attenuate that using this attenuator right here. And then you can also increase the amount that the sequencer is actually affecting. Let's corrupt some more notes on sequencer 1. And let's hear me increasing this envelope generator knob and the sequencer amount knob on the folder is just adding in more timbre by just triggering that wavefolder with the sequencer. Same difference with the filter. If I increase the envelope amount, the filter is actually going to sequencer amount 2, so everything that's happening on sequencer 2 is affecting this filter here. And let's actually blend that audio all the way over the filter so you can really hear. Let's increase this mod VCO. I turned the sequencer 2 amount all the way to the left so we could hear it just coming in unquantized. And it's worth noting that this mod VCO is made to be our modulation VCO, so it can go very low into like LFO rates. And it can go very high up to audio rates. Things can get really crazy when you do a mod VCO to VCO frequency mod via this knob right here. And now we're just taking this VCO and modulating that VCO before anything gets folded or filtered. So if you're going to do that, of course, it's best to kind of be at audio rate. So let's just go a little bit deeper and take all of these concepts from these parallel voices and these dual sequencers and get into some generative patching. Let's go through a few different patches and show why this thing gives you everything you need to do some fun generative synthesis. This is just like a fun, trippy, trilly sound design patch that I don't really normally do, but it's fun to do with this Labyrinth and this 32-point patch bay that I was talking about earlier. So in this one, I'm sort of taking the sequencer quantizer out of the loop by actually running the mod VCO out back into the mod VCO 1 volt octave in. And then I'm taking the envelope generator 1 out, which is still triggered by the sequencer. I'm taking that out and going into the VCO 1 volt per octave in. And then I'm actually using the wavefolder with this mixer. But anyways, it's really fun to just sort of increase the mod frequency in this patch. So, I mean, this is just like something fun to just get into and just try to find something that you like and maybe loop it in a DAW or just sit here and do this all day, because I certainly would. we're exploring the ring mod section a little bit, which I haven't done yet. So the ring mod, it's in this mixer section, and basically it allows you to add some more metallic tones to what you have going on. So in this case, it's doing the sum and differences of the VCO and the mod VCO. And it also has an effect when you start to go lower or higher on any one of these VCOs. And I also got this tube screamer here, which is on. But let's hear it off. So it definitely beefs up the signal a little bit. So let's increase that ring mod again, turn this back on. And then this patch can become generative if you take out, let's do the mod VCO out and go into bit flip 2, which is gonna flip some bits on sequencer 2 down here. So it's also worth mentioning that this crazy semi-modular generative synth, of course, is complemented well with effects, but the moment that you want to integrate this into your studio workflow, you can use the MIDI clock input on here and sync it up to anything you got. Your synths, your drum machines. In this case, I have my Poly in play over here, and it's sending out MIDI clock to this MIDI input. So even with this mod VCO flipping bits down here, I can increase the corrupt on sequencer 1 so things can get more randomized. And I have both of these VCOs quantized to a scale, in this case the pentatonic scale, so you can keep it musical. All right, so obviously this is more of a drum percussive style patch, but what's cool is this becomes instantly generative the moment that I do things like taking the sequence 1 trigger and using that to flip bits on sequencer 2 like I had. So now every time there's a trigger on sequence 1, which by the way, I have this length down to like 4 steps. But the moment that this sequence triggers, which is often, it's gonna add bits on sequencer 2. And that becomes even more generative when I start to increase the corrupt knob on sequencer 2. And as we know, the corrupt knob either turns bits on or off based off its own randomization. And then we can take things a step further by taking the sequence 2 triggers and using that to trig the envelope generator 2, which is hardwired to the VCA. And of course this is reverb, so I had to at least pull out another pedal like a reverb pedal. And this has been on, but let's hear it without it. Still pretty good dry, which is what you want. But you add in that reverb. Yeah, so this can get really cool and get really crazy. Got the notes down. Let's hold this to save. And now let's mess with this corrupt knob so we have something to go back to. So in this patch, I'm also once again using the sequencer triggers to generate bit flips on the other sequencer. So right now I'm using the sequencer 1 trigger going to bit flip 2. And I have the trig mix turned all the way over to sequencer 2 so we can hear a little bit of what it's doing. But let's go back to the middle. That way we have sequencer 1 coming in. Let's turn the noise down just a little bit. And of course, this can get a lot more random and generative as you start to increase the corrupt knob. So let's go on sequencer 1. And I also have the length set differently. So sequencer 1's length is at 4 steps, and sequencer 2 was at 8. Let's do 6. All right, and then take things a step further into the generative realm. We also got these 2 clock inputs here. Clock 1, pretty sure it goes to the main tempo knob. So we don't want to mess with that right now, but maybe we could try to run an envelope. Let's do the envelope generator 1 into clock 2, which is going to sequencer 2. Let's see what that does. So now we're really getting like an odd rhythm, which is what we want. We want to get lost into the maze, lost in the labyrinth. All right, y'all. Well, as you can see, we just got lost within the labyrinth, but we found our way out, and we found our way out through generative synthesis and through this amazing new semi-modular analog synthesizer from Moog. I actually think that this will pair perfectly with some of the other Moog semi-modular units, particularly the subharmonicon. I feel like if you had this and a subharmonicon, you have a very powerful generative modular system that can just lead to all sorts of different possibilities and just things that you could do with just those 2 units. But of course, you could also plug this up with other Eurorack that you have, taking advantage of this extensive patch beta you have over here using other modules like other random voltage generators, maybe some clock dividers. This will also probably pair very well with the Moog Minotaur, if not for any other reason than its mythical connection the Minotaur has within the Labyrinth. So shout out to Moog for just packing a lot into this parallel generative analog synthesizer. And you can get yours now, available on Reverb right now. You can order your Labyrinth. And yeah, start doing some generative patching and having fun with all the possibilities that you could do with this synth and adding it to others. Well, that's all I got for y'all today. I'm Fest Grandiose, signing off with Reverb. As always, stay safe and keep creating. Peace.